Support for WUWM podcasts comes from Bliffert Lumber, family-owned and operated for over 120 years. Bliffert serves contractors and homeowners across Milwaukee and southeastern Wisconsin. Learn more at bliffertlumber.com.
You're listening to Lake Effect Spotlight from WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR station. This is one of our favorite conversations from WUWM's daily talk show, Lake Effect.
If you go to a natural history museum almost anywhere in the world, you can expect to see dioramas displaying how animals behave in the wild. Dioramas have become integral to museums, transporting visitors to unfamiliar landscapes through art and science. But did you know that it started right here in Milwaukee? The Milwaukee-style diorama revolutionized how museums curated their exhibits, and the original diorama lives on at the Milwaukee Public Museum. Dr. Ellen Censky is the president and CEO of the museum, and she joins Lake Effect's Joy Powers to talk about the museum's long history with dioramas.
So when we think about dioramas, that can mean a whole wide variety of things. And yet, Milwaukee has a very interesting distinction as being kind of the birthplace of what we consider the Milwaukee-style diorama and maybe a more action-packed version of dioramas. Can you explain what the Milwaukee style of diorama is?
Let's just go back to that first, what is considered the first diorama, which was the Carl Akeley diorama that he did back in 1890. It was called not a diorama back then, it was a habitat group. He was the first one who actually created this 3D environment with a curved background, 3D images in the front, so those were the animals and the plants, and then it slowly fades to the background where it's a painted backdrop. So that is actually what we now consider dioramas, and he was the very first one who created this. And the reason he did it was he said, we can teach better if people can see the animals in their habitat.
Interesting. When you go to a museum now, you really do expect to be immersed in this environment in some ways. And yet at the time, this was pretty revolutionary. What would museums at that time have looked like in the late 1800s?
There would have been cases and displays called curiosity boxes, and they would have just had, if you had a stuffed bird, it would have been sitting next to maybe some mammal bones or a pot, or, so it would have been objects of curiosity and not with any context behind them. Or you could have a case that displayed a bunch of birds, but none of them would have been in a natural environment. So they would not have conveyed much information beyond looking at a stuffed bird or a pot. And so this was really revolutionary in trying to create a teaching tool that allowed you to learn more just by looking at something.
I feel like now we take for granted that if we see a bird today, there's a relatively good chance that we might be able to see what its environment looks like through a quick Google search. At the time, it would have been much more difficult for people to really get an idea of where this animal lived, how they lived. What's really amazing about the muskrat diorama at the Milwaukee Public Museum is that you get these different kinds of layers of how a muskrat would live in the landscape. Can you describe a bit what that looks like?
Yeah, it's a really interesting diorama in that it is done at the surface of the water, so half of the diorama is below the surface, half is above. And he, interestingly, created this environment where you could actually see what do muskrats do both above and below the water. And so there's the entire habitat above the water, and then what we normally don't see, which is what's below the water. And it's just sliced right through this habitat so that you can see it all. So it really was so innovative at its time.
Now, you mentioned, of course, dioramas have become really the heart and soul of the Milwaukee Public Museum. There is, of course, the muskrat diorama, which is still at the museum, but there are a lot of more immersive experiences inside of that space that are also considered dioramas. When you go to the Public Museum, what are the different kinds of dioramas that you'll see today?
So today you will have the similar ones to the Akeley, but on larger scale, not behind glass. So on the third floor, if you go to Africa or you go around the world, you'll see these open dioramas where on either side of the walkway you're walking through these immersive environments, but you're not right in them, which are those with the curved backdrops where the foreground is 3D that fades into a background that is painted, and seamlessly that foreground fades into that background, giving you this long distance that you're looking at when it's really not long distance. So there are lots of those. There are also the rainforest one where you walk right in and you are surrounded by a two-story rainforest. And so you are right inside the diorama. So, and then we have the little peek through the window, tiny dioramas where you can get a sense of cultures from around the world from the past. So we have many different kinds of dioramas, and it is a museum filled with dioramas.
Now, of course, the Milwaukee Public Museum has a new space that is currently being built, currently being put together. Can we expect to see this tradition of dioramas live on in the new space?
Of course, yes. I mean, that is what we're known for. And so that is something that when we were in the library, when the library was actually half museum, half library, we had dioramas, and we came over here and we exploded those dioramas and did the next best thing. And so that's what we will be doing in that new museum, is those immersive environments that have, some of them will have painted backdrops, some will have backdrops that actually move, so more media oriented, but they will have those 3D forefronts that fade into the background. So those similar things, but in some we'll use technology to create that. In others, it'll be that painted. In fact, some of those backdrops are being painted as we speak. Not in the museum, but they will be in the museum.
And can we expect to see the muskrats in the new museum?
Oh, the muskrat is coming. That's an easy one to move since it says it's small and contained, and it will be on display in the new museum in our nature connector.
Very nice. Well, Ellen, thank you so much for joining us here on Lake Effect.
Oh, you're welcome.
That was Dr. Ellen Censky, President and CEO of the Milwaukee Public Museum, home of the first Milwaukee-style diorama, the Muskrat Family Group designed by Carl Akeley in 1890. Not only did Akeley's diorama revolutionize museum displays, it also inspired a yearly celebration known as the Diorama Rama. Local dioramist Dee Kirschling started the event 10 years ago with a month-long celebration she dubbed National Diorama Month. Kirschling joins Lake Effect's Joy Powers in studio, along with fellow dioramist Angela Johnston-Beyer, whose recreation of the museum's Living Oceans exhibit was featured in this year's Diorama Rama celebration.
What first got you interested in dioramas?
So I am a huge fan of the Milwaukee Public Museum, and they are known for their dioramas, and I have been going there my entire life. And coincidentally, March was always kind of my least favorite month of the year. So I started making dioramas. I had, was kind of bored, and I had bought a pair of shoes around that same time, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to make a diorama. And I jokingly called March National Diorama Month, and just kind of snowballed from there. I've just always enjoyed making them in school and then seeing them in our public museum.
Now, Dee, you said that it kind of snowballed. What did that snowball look like?
Well, one day in a March 10 years ago, my husband, Joe, kind of just said, you should have a diorama for National Diorama Month. And I said, you know what, you're right. And that's where it snowballed. I had my first one 10 years ago. The theme was Milwaukee. And it was on the last Tuesday of March because that was what the bar that I was having it at, that was the date they had available. And that was 10 years ago. So we've had, we haven't had 10 of them. We've had 8 of them. But it's gotten bigger and bigger every year that we've had it.
What would you say really attracts people to the Diorama? What is it about dioramas that you think speaks to the community?
I think there's a couple of things. We all love tiny things. Tiny things are so cute. And also the Diorama focuses on adults. I love kids, and I love that they make dioramas, but this event is specifically for adults to create dioramas. And I think as we grow more mature, our worlds get a little bit smaller, and we put aside a lot of stuff that we could do for ourselves. So I think it gives people an excuse, in a way, to cut loose and make something that's just for fun.
I would absolutely agree. And as a participant, being able to kind of spend my extra free time creating something where it's just a little bit of an amusement, it's just something lighthearted. And the time of year with things being kind of cold and indoors, it's just been a really nice break from reality sometimes, and kind of just taking my time at the end of every day to just work on a diorama for, an hour. And all the themes that Dee has picked over the years have always been very clever, and definitely it's a family-friendly event, but it has always been really fun to see other adults kind of putting their own spin on whatever the theme is for that particular year. And I would go back to the nostalgia of it from being a kid, and that having that pride in this thing that I created with my 2 hands. Growing up with the Milwaukee Public Museum, I just remember spending hours there as a kid and just wanting to stare at all the different dioramas, but for a long period of time because I wanted to just take in every little detail.
All those nooks and crannies, everything you can see.
The artists just did such a tremendous job of, every little nook and cranny has its own little unique feature. And every time I would come to the museum, I'd see something new that I hadn't seen before.
Plus, they come alive at night.
It's absolutely. And as a kid, I truly believed that.
Me too.
I think I saw a documentary about that. Night at the Museum.
Yeah, it's absolutely a documentary.
Absolutely.
So thinking about dioramas, especially for people who are listening to this and might be curious about making their own dioramas, what would you say is the right space to start in? What do you need to start a diorama?
Well, that's what I think is kind of great about creating dioramas for Dioramarama is that it's such a wide range of people who participate in terms of skill set. And there are people like me who definitely start a month in advance, but there are other people who pick it up the weekend before. And that's what's really kind of great about it. It's like, you pick an idea and you can kind of use almost anything to create a scene that expresses a fun idea, or again, going with the Milwaukee Public Museum this year was such a great opportunity for us to recreate something that we loved as a kid. So for me, I picked the Silurian squids. I mean, I know they're not squids, but and a moldorama for my childhood. Those were like the things that, I just loved so passionately. It was just such a thrill.
I like to tell people to think outside of the box, but it is a classic move to have a diorama in a shoebox. And so we do get many folks that create that as their diorama, and I love it. I am here for it.
Now, Angela, you were mentioning your diorama. I was very impressed by the moldorama. You really made it. If you didn't know it was tiny, looking at a photo of it, you would think it was a moldorama. How do you go about figuring out how to make that kind of piece?
A lot of trial and error, I would say. But, again, it's getting an idea and just trying to see around my house what are the things that I could use to help create this idea. So you'll notice if you look very closely, there'll be things like, oh, that's a straw, or that is the bubble top to an item that I got from the hardware store. That is, again, it's a lot of garbage, but it's just always been something I think that even as a kid, I loved to try to just create these little shoebox worlds, with any sort of idea that I could come up with, and honestly with whatever sort of stuff I had around the house.
I have so many bins in my craft room that are just marked miscellaneous because it's just all little things. I'm like, this might be good for something in the future. You never know.
And a lot of times I'll find a piece of stuff that I'm about to throw away, whether it's the cap for a toothpaste bottle or, just something. And I go, what can I make out of that? And yeah, I definitely can go into a bin and just sit there until I've got a good project and then sift through, what do I have here? What do I see in these things that I have in front of me?
For sure. When you think about your favorite dioramas over the past, 10 years, what are some of the builds that come to mind?
I love them all, and I really, truly do. People ask me every year which one is my favorite. I will say I do have one from a couple years ago. The theme was the 90s, and so it is a Comet Cafe from the 90s that one of the dioramas made, Laurel Sulfate, and it's just tremendous. And she actually let me keep it. I don't usually get to keep the items, but I have that one at my house, and it lights up. I mean, the tiny little posters in the window, the detail is tremendous. It's really cool.
I will concur that is actually one of my favorites as well. But it is one of those things where this might be considered a contest. There's usually a winner, but I think all of us who participate, we don't really think of it as a contest. What we enjoy is being able to see all these different dioramas pulled together in one event, and it's really hard. It's hard to pick a favorite every year.
I love that you are reluctant to call it a contest because I run it, and I don't like calling it a contest. We allow people to purchase voting tickets as one of the ways that we raise money. And I'm going to continue to do that, but it's really hard. I don't know how people vote for their favorite because they're all so wonderful. And I don't like putting an emphasis on winning necessarily because if you participate, you are winning.
Absolutely. And quite honestly, I don't think anybody that participates would be looking to get any sort of particular prize. It feels almost more like a gallery night in a way. And I think most of us who talk about the participation of it usually lead with that it's a great fundraiser.
Very nice. Thank you both so much for joining us here on Lake Effect.
Great. I had a great time. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Dee Kersling is the chief dioramist at National Diorama Month and the creator of the Diorama Rama event. Angela Johnstead Beyer is one of the dioramists who was featured in the Diorama Rama. They both join Lake Effect's Joy Powers.
That was the Lake Effect Spotlight podcast. It comes from your local NPR station, WUWM. Subscribe to the Lake Effect Spotlight podcast to hear more great stories about Milwaukee.